Hello, my name is James Figueroa, and today I will be doing my presentation on the influenza. So, first things first, what is the influenza? Well, the influenza, which is more commonly called the flu, is a contagious viral infection that is caused by influenza viruses. Some areas that are often affected by the flu are the lungs, nose, and throat, meaning that when patients become susceptible to the influenza, they will normally notice symptoms in these main three areas. So, some numbers about the flu. On average, about 8% of the US population becomes infected with the influenza. That statistic is based on patients that show symptoms, meaning that the numbers are much higher for people that, if it were to include asymptomatic patients. So, if it were to include them, it would range from anywhere from about 5% to nearly 20%. And to put that into actual numbers, that would be about 66 million people. So, since there are so many strains, the range is quite large, going from 3% in 2011 all the way to 11% for the years 2012 and 2013. So, what that means is that the strains for the flu are very different, and that some can be more likely to be transmittable, and others are much less likely to be transmittable. So, the numbers really do change from year to year and strain to strain. So, is there more than one type of the flu? Yes, there are 4 different types of the flu, and I categorized A and B together and C and D together. Influenzas A and B are the main contributors to seasonal epidemics of disease, meaning that during the flu season it will typically be one of the A or B influenzas. In addition to that, influenza A is the only known virus to cause flu pandemics. Influenzas A and B, however, are separated because for influenzas A's, they are based on the proteins that are found on the surface of the virus. So it'd be a combination of H blank N blank. Therefore, you get names such as H1N1 or H3N2, which would be the swine flu and the avian flu. While influenzas B's are classified into 2 different lineages, either B Victoria or B Yamagata. So for influenza C and D, they are the only known influenzas to express the enzyme esterase. For influenza C, it typically affects not only humans but also pigs. However, it only results in mild illnesses and symptoms that, although they are rather cumbersome, they are not as severe as influenza A or B. Usually, the most damage for influenza C is just a local outbreak, such as like a pig farm or anything of that sort. Influenza D, on the other hand, is known to only affect pigs and cattle. And because of that, it mutates at a much slower rate than any other influenza, meaning that's a lot less likely for it to have a massive outbreak where it's constantly mutating and changing and there's not much to do about it. So, where is the flu typically found and who does it normally affect? So, the flu obviously affects anyone, whether you're children or elderly, it can get to you. However, the flu is especially infectious for children. Because of that, children are twice as likely to develop a symptomatic infection compared to elderly people that are age 65 and up. This is due to many varying factors, such as children are constantly touching stuff and touching their eyes, ears, mouth, and then going to another child and playing with them. And typically when they have the flu, they don't realize how their body is actually tired, so they will feel perfectly fine and go running around and go to school as normal, and then they could potentially infect other people. So it's just a wide variety of reasons, but children are typically the ones to be infected first. In addition to that, the flu is also especially highly common during the fall and winter, meaning that it thrives in the cold seasons. But it is year-round, meaning that you can still become infected over the course of summer. So, how does one know if they have the flu? Some common symptoms include a fever, which ranges from temperatures of 100 to 104, meaning that's a pretty high fever, and it's rather noticeable. Some body chills, a cough, a sore throat, runny nose, headaches, fatigue, and for children and adults, vomiting or diarrhea. It's interesting because Normally, when elderly become infected with the flu, they don't express the symptoms such as vomiting and diarrhea is only present in mostly children and adults. So, how does one treat these symptoms? So, normally the flu doesn't require you to go to a hospital or visit your doctor, but you should go if you do experience severe symptoms that are lasting much longer than anticipated. If you're having excessive vomiting or shortness of breath and you've been having these issues for longer than a week, you should definitely go visit your doctor as soon as possible because it can lead to something much more serious. In addition to those, if you have any pre-existing conditions such as asthma, heart diseases, or pregnancy, you should also visit your doctor because you don't want to risk anything. Some common treatments for the flu are oseltamivir, which is Tamiflu, zanamivir, which is Relenza, or peramivir, which is Rapivab. In addition to taking these medications, someone infected with the flu should also stay home and get lots of rest and maintain healthy levels of liquid. So, if you are infected with the flu, you should try your best and stay home and just get tons of rest, drink lots of water, replace your electrolytes, because more often than not, people will go to the emergency room not because of the flu-like symptoms, but because of the result of these flu-like symptoms. You will more often see people going into the emergency room for dehydration due to the vomiting or diarrhea, more likely than you are to see someone go into the emergency room due to something such as a high fever. So, in addition to doing my presentation on the influenza, I also did my research paper on it, and specifically I did it on the effects of oseltamivir, which is Tamiflu, on the influenza. So, in addition to being the main treatment for the flu, surprisingly, Tamiflu can also be used as a makeshift flu shot. If you are able to take it daily and you are constantly being exposed to high levels of flu outbreaks, you can potentially prevent becoming infected by taking this medication. Although it's not recommended because it is a daily dosage of Tamiflu every day until the flu season is over, which could begin in September and will last all the way until the end of February. So it's not really recommended. In addition to that, I did learn that Tamiflu, although it is the first line of defense for the flu, there are multiple strains of the influenza A that are immune to the effects of oseltamivir. In addition to that, some of the more common ones are H5N1 and H1N1, which were the avian flu and the swine flu, which, as we got to know in the next slide, can lead to some very dangerous effects. So, what happens if no one attempts to stop the rate of infection? So, as many people know, the leading cause behind an influenza pandemic is the emergence of a new influenza A virus that is different from the currently circulated one that is just as easily able to be spread from person to person. So, over the last 100 years, there have been 4 different pandemics that were all influenza A, which include 2 H1N1 viruses, both which were called, or the H1N1, which is known as the swine flu. One was in the beginning of the 1900s, and then the most recent one being as recent as 2009. The second one was the H2N2 virus, which happened in the mid-1900s. And then lastly, there was the H3N2 virus, which was the avian flu. So what I found really interesting about the influenza was that it's been around for a very, 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 very long time. And the earliest known flu-like outbreak dates all the way back to 400 BC, in which Hippocrates, the famous scholar, detailed symptoms of a human-like influenza that was infecting thousands of people with symptoms such as fevers, vomiting, and excessive chills. So it's crazy how something that was as prevalent back then is still just as dangerous as it is now. So how can we prevent or contain the influenza? So the first thing you want to do if you want to prevent the flu is to get your annual flu shot. Just like every sign you see says, get your flu shot as soon as possible, that we can prevent any sort of flu. In addition to getting the flu shot, you should also always remain diligent when being exposed to someone that is exhibiting flu-like symptoms. So if you are going to a classroom and you know the flu season's coming up, you should always mind your hygiene and Try not to touch your face as often. Don't have physical contact with other students as often, or just try and limit physical touching with objects, people, anything. However, if you do have the flu, you should wear a face mask. That way you can prevent the transmission of the infection to anyone else, especially since it can be lethal for elderly. So that is everything, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you very much.